This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I am a true bass for sure. This is probably the longest I've been sick in a very long time. The thing is, it's gone progressively worse over the last week. What started as a mild cough has now descended into, I don't even know, just general lethargy and occasional headaches. Is it the beer bug? Is it seasonal allergies? I don't have the first clue. It hasn't completely killed my ability to work, but it has been tough to keep the energy levels up. That's why I'm trying this creatine powder and seeing how much of a difference it makes with my performance. They say this stuff works. Experts, that is. We will see how true that is, or if it's just more of that trendy BS that people hop on because everyone else is doing it. What's the popular thing everyone tries to do now? Looks maxing, breaking your jaw to realign the bones, trying to make yourself look like Giga Chad. I would like to say that I'm surprised at people's stupidity, but ever since the advent of TikTok, nothing surprises me anymore. Remember when people were eating Tide Pods? That was the official point where I lost all faith in humanity. They say you're supposed to give it a week or two before you see any substantial difference with the powder stuff. So far, I'm on day 3. So it really hasn't kicked in yet. But I'll still give it some time. I still have the energy to try to power through a podcast, although it'll probably kill my voice by the end of it. But we do have a WWF pay-per-view to talk about, and I wanted to make sure I could fit that in. So this is the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast no one knows but everyone needs. Make sure you all subscribe, comment, and give the show a like. Check us out on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for classic wrestling discussions. Now, at the time you're currently hearing this, I have not watched the next episode of Mid-South Television, but I did learn that there is not an episode of WCW to talk about. So, I might have a little bit of extra time tomorrow to rest and get out of the slump I've been in. I'm trying to stay motivated. But right now I'm just trying to take it easy and see if I feel any better tomorrow. I did take one of those Zicam tablets that you're supposed to help with decongestion. I have a nasal spray that I'm going to use. I don't know. I don't really have a specific product that is my go-to. Problem is I rarely get sick. But I do remember the nasal spray being very effective, especially after last year when I dropped that frickin' barbell on my face. What I'm going through right now is still not as bad as that. That was a miserable experience. Couldn't even sleep right because my nasal pathways were so fucked up. I mean, you might remember some of those shows earlier last year. I sounded like Chucky Finster for a month straight. Couldn't talk, couldn't smell, couldn't taste anything. It sucked. I haven't completely lost my sense of smell or taste. Knock on wood. The lesson to be learned is don't get sick. However you can avoid it. But I guess we should get into this thing. It's time to uncover the Undertaker's revenge. How did the Phenom seek vengeance on the two men that burned his face on TV several weeks ago? Oh, by the way, apparently I've been getting the title wrong. It's not Revenge of Taker. It's Revenge of the Taker. Which is hilarious because never in the history of WWE has anybody ever nicknamed him the Taker. It's either Taker or The Undertaker. Not The Taker. I mean, at that point, they may as well have just called the thing Revenge of the Undertaker. Of course, I'm purely splitting hairs. There were plenty of other issues concerning this pay-per-view aside from the wacky-ass title. The fact that they titled these shows period was silly. So we open with the Tag Team Championship match between the Road Warriors and the Hart Foundation. A feud that has seemingly become more about the Road Warriors getting slopped by the Hog Farmers, as opposed to being about anything regarding the issues between the two teams fighting for the belts. A classic WWF booking case of how can we make something more unnecessarily complex for no particular reason? Which was the story of this match looking back. An unnecessarily complex, overbooked nightmare. It was basically a tale of two tapes. There was the first half of the match, which just kind of existed, meaning that there was absolutely nothing to it. It was a run-of-the-mill TV match for about the first 8 or so minutes. And then there was all the Russo-inspired falderall that took place at the end. Here's the thing. In a vacuum, the overbooking wasn't a horrible idea on paper. The problem, though, is that A, I don't think it generated the right crowd reaction when they did the initial false finish. And B, after they did the DQ run-in at the end with Bret and fucked the Road Warriors over a second time, it totally sucked the air out of the room. Basically, what they tried to do was an NWA Crockett-style finish in 1997 in front of a WWF audience that, frankly, didn't get it. And as the famous cliche goes, it fell flatter than a plate full of piss. So here's what happened. They do the initial false finish where the Legion of Doom give Davey Boy the big middle rope power slam. The problem, though, is that they end up pinning the wrong guy because Owen was technically the legal partner. So Mike Chioda waves off the call and restarts the match. We did get a great moment where Owen and Davey were in the aisleway complaining about the match being restarted. And Owen's throwing his hands up going, "Give us our belts back. They should be disqualified." Then, of course, it leads to Fink getting on the house mic and explaining that if Owen and Davey don't get back to the ring by a count of 10, they will forfeit the match and the belts. And so Chioda begins a legit fast 10 count, where Owen and Davey barely make it back to the fucking ring before 10. Like, we're talking milliseconds. He legitimately almost counted them out for a shoot. And like I said, they restart the match and wrestle for a few more minutes, only to lead to the Road Warriors getting a visual pin on Owen after hitting the Doomsday. But of course, Bret is supposed to hit the ring for the DQ before the Road Warriors get the actual pin. The problem, however, is that Bret missed his cue and was late getting to the ring. So poor Mike Chioda's having to stall for like 8 full seconds waiting for Bret to get into the ring to break up this pinfall attempt. Those are always the worst kind of situations to be in as a referee. Because on the one hand, you have a specific task being assigned to you prior to the match, but you're also supposed to treat the thing like a real contest if you're being trained properly. So all this wound up doing was burying Mike, because it was so painfully obvious that Bret fucked up. Like, in hindsight, if I were Mike Chioda in that situation, I would have counted the pinfall and dealt with the consequences afterwards. Like, hey man, Bret missed his cue. What do you want me to do? We're trying to get people to suspend disbelief that this is a real sport, right? Well, if this were real, the Road Warriors would have legitimately won the titles. The whole thing just... it didn't work. I don't know how else to bluntly put it. I'm a huge fan of everybody involved here, but this was a very poorly executed match and heat angle. I mean, I figured going in that Hawk and Animal were going to walk out with the belts based on what they've been doing on television with them and the pig farmers. But you know, given how they've been booked since they came back to the WWF earlier this year, I don't know if putting the belts on them would have mattered anyway. It is probably the strongest they've been presented since coming back. But what does that really mean in a WWF context? Certainly doesn't give me high hopes to see them resume their feud with Phineas and Henry Godwin. Especially knowing what's about to happen to Henry soon. So before we get the next match, they had Sonny and Brian Pillman plugging the hotline number. And the only reason that's even worth mentioning is because, unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure this is the first on-screen appearance we've seen from Pillman since the gun angle with Austin last year, right? Bearing in mind that we don't review any of the other secondary shows like Shotgun Saturday Night, I definitely know that Pillman hasn't made any Raw appearances in the last several months. Nor has he made pay-per-view appearances. I know he's also about to get cleared to come back to work pretty soon. After being under a WWF contract for, going on 10 months? Yeah, he's finally going to get to work a match. The few matches that he got to work before, well, you know. So up next they did Savio Vega versus Rocky Maivia for the Intercontinental title. This is fresh off their super hot, super exciting house show match in South Africa where the whole thing was 95% nerve holds and 5% okay action. So we get this match again less than 7 days later on pay-per-view, no less. If their first match was terrible and sleep-inducing, this was slightly less terrible and maybe slightly less sleep-inducing. There were definitely less nerve holds from Savio here, although he still broke a few of them out during the course of this match. The only real notable highlight was Farouk coming out to do commentary, but he was given a janky headset, to which he cleverly tried to blame the racist WWF production staff. Good touch. And so, well, if there's one thing that's always reassuring about dishing out hard-earned money for one underwhelming TV quality match on pay-per-view, it's back-to-back underwhelming TV quality matches on pay-per-view. And even better, back-to-back matches with fucked finishes. And a terrible fucked finish at that. At least with the opener, they tried to do something crafty. This was just the epitome of shitty bad TV finishes. I'm not kidding you, this is what they came up with. Rocky gets dumped to the outside in front of Crush. Crush proceeds to give him the hard punch to lay him out. At which point, Rocky is then counted out. So Savio wins, but of course he doesn't win the belt. So he's all pissed off after the fact. So he and Crush start getting into an argument. Farouk gets in there to try to break them up. And they all end up turning and ganging up on Rocky until Ahmed runs out with his crimson-colored workout pants to send everybody packing. Oh, guess which gimmick he brought with him here? The patented 2x4. And I actually lied. There were two standout moments in this segment. Aside from Ron calling the WWF racist for giving him a non-functioning headset, the other was Ahmed getting on the mic to call Farouk, and this is a direct quote, an illegal immigrant. I believe he also tried to use the derogatory term black ass. But the one that got me was illegal immigrant. I was like, wait, what? When did Ron ever establish that he was a non-American born citizen? The point here was that Ahmed accepted Farouk's challenge that he laid out on Raw the other week. The one where if Ahmed could beat the entire nation in a gauntlet, then Farouk would disband the nation entirely. And truthfully, when I look back at everything they did in this segment, especially with what they end up doing with Rocky later this year, the only thing that would have honestly made this segment worthwhile would have been seeing Rocky turn heel right then and there and beat the shit out of Ahmed. Yes, it would have ultimately been one of those Russo swerves. But hey, this babyface run was dying a death anyway. Why put it off any longer? Like, if you figured you had to eventually go heel with him anyway, may as well just have Rocky lay him out right there. What worse could it have possibly done for his career trajectory? I actually forget how they end up introducing Rocky into the group. I know he ends up getting hurt early on in the summer and he's off television for a few months recovering, but I don't remember the actual angle or build up to Rocky officially joining the nation. But we know it's a thing that happens. So, more fun stuff to look forward to, I guess. I think we can all attest, it was a much better career move than seeing him dying on the vine as vanilla-ass Rocky Maivia, getting worked over in nerve holds by Savio Vega on live pay-per-view, and doing shitty babyface comebacks that look beyond hokey. Say what you want about Rocky's goofy people's elbow and the infamous thigh slap punches. At least that shit got over. Yes, they looked atrocious, But the people always pop for it. They ain't popping for anything Rocky's doing right now, brother. Regardless of what the canned heat might say otherwise. So after we pitch back to the ring where Sable and Mark Marrow tried to bore the people into a coma with a promo, they proceed to shoot an angle in the same segment where Steve Austin is seen going into a men's bathroom, where we find out that Owen and Davey were waiting with blunt objects to beat him up. Because they just happened to know that Austin would find his way into this specific bathroom in the venue when a camera happened to be rolling at the time of it. Don't overthink it too much. The best part here is, after shooting this angle where Owen and Davey allegedly beat the shit out of Austin and left him for dead in this bathroom, we then pitch back to ringside, where Vince calmly turns to Lawler and Ross and goes, "Wow, crazy night so far, am I right?" Literally with about that level of concern. By the way, for anybody wondering, why did they shoot this angle in a bathroom? Think about the owner of the company, and think about his weird sense of humor. 'Tis not rocket science. So as we await to hear the status of Austin's rotting corpse inside this men's bathroom somewhere in the building, definitely an opportune time to go back to the ring for the debut of Rockabilly. Because that's what this pay-per-view desperately needed. We've now seen 2 matches, both of which had non-clean finishes and were glorified TV matches. So why the hell not? Let's kill the crowd further with Rockabilly versus Jesse James in the most pointless feud of 1997. I don't know if I even bothered addressing this on the Raw review last week. I figured it wasn't that important, but for clarity's sake, the Honky Tonk Man teased that he would be debuting Billy Gunn for this show, mainly as a means of getting back at Jesse for breaking his guitar and denying his services, so to speak. Keep in mind that in storyline, Billy Gunn also denied Honky's services, and he punched his lights out on TV less than 2 weeks ago. But now, for reasons that were never explained, Billy is now back to being aligned with the Honky Tonk Man. So why did he punch his lights out a few weeks ago on TV? Fuck if I know. And more importantly, fuck if I care. So they had this match. No shock. It sucked. Nobody in the crowd cared about anything they did. Jesse won with an out-of-nowhere small package that generated such a minimal response, you could hear mice pissing in the rafters as the bell rang. And then he narrowly avoided a guitar shot to the head right as the heels were about to try to get their heat back. I mean, that was far beyond the scope of the issues here. The fact that they debuted Rockabilly here and then beat him in his very first match under the gimmick. Again, why not? I honestly have nothing further to add. This was the embodiment of a bad Raw segment being done on pay-per-view for literally no other reason than we need to kill some airtime. As I've stated before, there's a reason this feud lasted shorter than the Anglo-Zanzibar War. I'm guessing by the way this all came off in execution, they didn't want to waste further time trying to pull the plug on it. And I don't blame them. So here's our status update on Austin. He's fine. Yeah, apparently the beatdown that Owen and Bulldog gave him earlier amounted to, well, based on Austin selling, a mild headache. I'm not kidding, that was the extent to Austin's injuries. He was not bruised. He was not bloody. He literally sat in the locker room with a towel over his head and cupped his face in his hands. But the injury was severe enough to where Gorilla Monsoon rearranged the card so that Austin could buy a little more recovery time. Which was very kind of Monsoon. Especially considering that Austin literally threatened to beat his ass on TV the other week. And so we end up getting The Undertaker versus Mankind in the semi-main event for the title. We already kind of set up the theme for this pay-per-view at the top of the review. This was, for better or worse, less about the actual WWF Championship, more about Taker getting his revenge on Mankind and Paul Bearer for lighting his face on fire. I mean, given the circumstances, if it boils down to a championship title versus seeking redemption for somebody trying to set my facial features ablaze, title is kind of secondary in that case, right? Unless you're Ric Flair, I guess. On the topic of the face injury, good makeup job on Taker's kayfabe injured eye. They actually put a fair amount of detail into making that look somewhat legit. You know, as legit as you could work something like that without literally carving out a portion of Taker's retina. Obviously, when it comes to the dynamic between Mankind and Taker, I mean, they've had, I don't know how many dozens of matches during their long-standing rivalry. I can probably count on one hand the amount of them I would consider duds. They've always worked well together. It was a natural inbuilt chemistry. They did a great job presenting this as two guys that were looking to practically kill each other. I mean, with Mankind, there were many moments in this match where I thought he was deliberately trying to kill himself on purpose. The big spot was him getting rammed into the guardrail back of the head first. And that was Foley taking all of that bump, by the way. He literally threw himself headfirst into the guardrail. Didn't even try to cushion the blow. I would certainly not advise people in today's business to attempt to take bumps like that. Especially with how easy everybody gets hurt nowadays. Don't do shit like that. One thing I did notice is how The Undertaker modified his signature rope walk spot. In actuality, this is something that he probably did as a one-time thing and said, yeah, I'm never attempting it that way again. If you've seen him do the spot, you know what it looks like. He'll grab the one guy's hand and then use it for leverage as he's balancing himself on the ropes to keep himself stable. Here, he used Foley's hand as a guide until he got halfway down the cables. And I have no idea why he even tried this, but he proceeded to let go of Foley before doing a big suicide dive onto him. And he barely cleared the ropes. I saw that and I'm like, That is the dumbest thing I would see Mark do until that asinine suicide dive he tried to give to Shawn Michaels at that WrestleMania where he damn near broke his neck. Like, had he slipped and fallen here, he would have legitimately died. No question. There was no wiggle room. I mean, there was a lot that happened throughout the course of this match. I took a decent amount of notes. Oh, this is funny. The announcers mentioning Vader getting detained in Kuwait. That legitimately popped me when they brought that up. I was like, oh my God, that's right. That did happen this week. Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone's at least partially aware about the Vader Kuwait saga. If you don't know, you have to look up the story. It is such a fascinating tale. Especially when you realize that they didn't smarten up the guy that Vader got physical with on that talk show. What was it? He ended up getting fined like $150 or whatever it was. It's just, you know, it kind of played into the continual downward spiral of Vader's run in the WWF by this point, which I know is sad, but it is also humorous and ironic at the same time. So they, well, the match got a decent amount of time. They packed a lot of action in. There were a few questionable booking decisions during this match, such as the announcers wondering why the match continued after Mankind used a folding chair on the Undertaker on the floor, after also using some other plunder as well. The answer is because disqualifications were nebulous in the WWF circa the late 90s. Only when it was convenient to the story would DQs actually be enforced. See the opener as an example. And so they do the ref bump with Kyoto, and as Foley's going ballistic on Taker and trying to put the mandible claw on him, they also almost kill the poor second referee with him landing on his head after hitting the apron and falling to the floor. That was one of those bumps that I went back and watched several times and kept wondering, how did that fucker not die? Oh, by the way, I mentioned chair shots earlier. Chair shots to the head. Those are about to become more constant over the next several years. And there were a plentiful amount of them in this match. Unprotected, by the way, in case you needed clarification. There's actually a really famous bump here that I've seen the WWF use in highlight reels over the years. That was Foley's headfirst bump through the announce table. I forgot that was this match where that took place. They do a spot where Taker rips his mask off, and as Mankind's trying to climb back into the ring, Taker charges him and gives him the big boot off the apron. And then Foley does one of those ass over tea kettle bumps through the table, but he sells it like he's dead, which is probably why it's been replayed so many times over the years, because the bump did look remarkable. That led to Taker giving Mankind the chokeslam for a near fall, ended up finally putting him away with a tombstone, which led directly into the afterbirth with Undertaker and Mankind awkwardly finger-fucking around with the match and paper gimmick. Before I talk about the whole oh shit moment here, gotta talk about this gimmick. I don't know what was going on there, but God, that looked horrendous. It almost looked as if Mankind was supposed to preset the flash paper before Taker grabbed it. But for whatever reason, Foley was having a hard time getting the fucking thing to cooperate, because Well, I mean, naturally, whenever guys are supposed to use gimmicks for key parts and segments, naturally the gimmicks never work, right? It's the electric clipper principle. Guy loses a stipulation match and is supposed to get his head shaved. Of course the electric razor doesn't work. It was the same thing with the flash paper. So we get this incredibly awkward deal where Mankind's trying to get this gimmick set up while Taker's going after Paul. Like at the same time, he's looking over his shoulder at Foley and trying to talk to him like, what's going on, brother? Like you could see they're trying to communicate something to call any kind of audible. Finally, I think they just said, fuck it. So Taker grabs the flash paper and starts trying to get the match going. And of course, he has to be quick with it because if you know anything about how the flash paper gimmick works, there's not a lot of breathing room between getting the thing to light versus getting the flame to go off properly. So they couldn't really milk the drama with Taker standing over Paul in the corner. So as Paul's throwing his hands up and begging and pleading for mercy, Taker has to quickly set off the fireball and back away so Paul can sell it. And so he throws the jacket over his face. Mankind goes out to take him to the back. And, well, that was the revenge payoff. I mean, it worked about as best as they could hope for, considering the uncooperative nature of the flash paper, I guess. It was a very good title match, Afterbirth notwithstanding. Like I said, these guys always worked well as opponents. There's a reason the Foley-Taker feud is among my all-time favorite rivalries in wrestling. And they could run this back many times, and it always worked. Accounting for them getting too cute with all the fireball stuff, the match still got over. The angle accomplished what it needed to. It's about to set up a whole ton of great shit leading into the fall. So I was fine with all this. It would have been a very lackluster main event had they actually closed the pay-per-view with this match. So in hindsight, I'm glad they chose to close it out with Bret Austin. And so let's talk about the forgotten third match in the series. Bret Hart versus Stone Cold, the post-WrestleMania Classic edition, which is probably why no one ever talks about this match. It's like following a fireworks show with backyard sparklers. And I don't want to immediately take the piss out of everything, but I think we can all say this in no way stacks up to either the Survivor Series or the WrestleMania match. And it's not to say I didn't like the match or that it wasn't good. In actuality, it was a perfectly fine wrestling match. It was a little tough getting into certain aspects of the brawling, especially that we literally just saw a glorified street fight with the Taker-Mankind match that preceded this. But still, both guys worked hard. I wish they would have bothered to play off whatever injury Austin sustained in that beating that Owen and Davey gave him earlier. That was still one of the biggest glaring issues out of that whole angle. Like they went through all that trouble of having the heels beat up Austin to delay this match. And then when Austin came out, he was perfectly fine until Bret cheated and started using the chair on his leg. Now, if they would have had Austin selling the leg before the use of the chair, it would have made that bathroom angle more coherently thought through. Saying that with a straight face was challenging. But you know what I mean, right? And it was pretty much the central theme to everything they did here. Bret worked over Austin's leg. Every so often, Austin would try to fight back and gain the upper hand, but get cut off again. I know that probably doesn't seem like the most enthralling thing to watch for 20 plus minutes. If any two men were capable of making it work, though, it was Bret and Austin. I did have a good laugh when Bret forgot which leg he was previously working over. It was funny because he had already exposed Austin's right knee pad earlier in the match anyway. But then at some point he started going after Austin's left leg. And you could even see Austin trying to wave at him like, "Other knee, Bret, other knee." Other than that brain fart, it ended up with Austin using the leg brace on Bret to break up the sharpshooter. And when Austin went to lock in the sharpshooter on Bret, Owen and Davey ran out to cause a distraction. At that point, you could call the finish in your sleep. Unsurprisingly, Davey hits the ring and lays out Austin in the back with a chair to force the DQ, which was a very apropos finish in more ways than one for this already mediocre pay-per-view. But they did send the fans home somewhat happy with having Austin go after Bret to target his leg post-match. He ended up smashing his leg over and over with a chair before locking in the sharpshooter. Then as Bret got pulled out by his boys, Austin stood tall and threw up the middle finger salute to close everything out. You know, it's one of those things where I just have to sort of accept that fucked finishes are about to become a mainstay in the WWF for a while. Not that I'm not unaccustomed to seeing these kinds of finishes in wrestling. It's not really the issue. The issue, as we're about to find out, is that they rely way too heavily on the DQ finishes, to the point where it ends up becoming one of those lazy booking cop-outs, where they don't want to flat out beat somebody, but they don't end up making anybody look good coming out of it. So it's a lose-lose situation. In their defense, they at least had the babyface stand tall at the end, so they threw everyone a bone in that sense. But it was still a very lousy way to end what was already a good match prior to the disqualification. But I'm not going to bury it solely because of the bad finish. It is frustrating to look back at a card when you realize 60% of the finishes were either countouts or DQs. The only real decisive finish we got in the whole thing was Taker beating Mankind with a tombstone. I mean, even the Road Dogg pinning Billy Gunn was one of those flat out of nowhere type finishes. So I can't even really call that a good finish. And it was a pay-per-view purely carried by the final two matches. And even so, I wouldn't say the Bret Austin match is something you need to really seek out, especially if you have any knowledge of their previous two matches. And the pay-per-view was kind of what I was expecting it to be in my head. Like I mentioned before, I had zero recollection of anything that ever happened on this show. And this, honestly, is probably the first time I've actually seen the pay-per-view in full. If I did see this as a kid growing up with my brothers, it was certainly not a show that gave me a lasting impression. But having seen it now, didn't seem like I was missing out on much. And so, well, it's on with the next one, right? We'll keep moving forward in the timeline and see just how bleak things are about to get over the dreary summertime, which is traditionally a bad time frame for the WWF. That May through mid-July period, it's usually a giant ball of nothing. It's going to be a lot of void filler and, outside the Team Canada stuff, not much of note. But there you have it. Hopefully next time you hear me, I won't be so congested and groggy. I'm surprised I managed to get through this podcast. In retrospect, I probably could have watched Retro Raw, but I just don't have the energy, dude. Not this weekend. My health and sanity is more important. So, you got the pay-per-view recap. It should be good enough. But thanks everybody for checking out the 5 Starr Wrestling Report, and we will be back this coming Friday for a Mid-South review. Like I said, there is no episode of WCW Saturday Night to talk about, so it'll be a relatively short Friday show, which I am okay with. But I'll talk to you all soon, and thanks for watching. Take care, and peace out.